How's it going, guys? I'm Peach with Workers in the Harvest Church, Alaska. And before we get started, I'm going to pray again. So, Father, in Jesus' name, thank you for this opportunity to come and speak, especially for all the online people who are going to be watching this, Lord. And God, I ask that you bless them and bless these words I'm about to say, Jesus, and help them, help these words get across any type of computer screen or anything to reach the other people, God. And God, guide my words, be here, and speak through me, and don't let any credit fall on me, but fall on you in Jesus' name. Okay, so yesterday I talked about the disciples a little bit. If you listen to the Drunk Promises message, but today I want to kind of go over again, kind of the day in the life of a disciple. So the disciples walked with Jesus for 3 years straight, all right, and they were with Jesus through everything. So from day one, they were there with Jesus, watching him perform miracles, and they literally walked with Jesus, who is God, as a person, and so they knew who Jesus was, and eventually they were the first ones to realize that Jesus was God as a person, and that Jesus is the Messiah, and the only way to heaven is through Jesus. And that stuff they all learned through spending time with God, pretty much. And so the disciples got to watch Jesus perform all these miracles and do all these different things. So whenever the disciples, or whenever Jesus healed every deaf person, the disciples were right there with him. And anytime Jesus performed any type of miracle, he was right there. When the dude got lowered down from the hole in the roof, who was paralyzed, and Jesus told him to pick up your mat and walk, the disciples were there and they saw all of it. And I wouldn't be surprised if while they were walking through the desert with Jesus, if Jesus would just stop for a moment and sit down the disciples and just talk to them a little bit and tell them about, the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, and tell them, just teach them the Bible, and, he'd whip out a scroll and he'd, show it to them and stuff. And that's the kind of a relationship that the disciples had with Jesus. He was their mentor, and he was their life for 3 years. Jesus spent every time he had with his disciples, and he really poured in to these 12 people. And so it's safe to say that the disciples knew who Jesus was, right? If anyone spent 3 years with me and never left my side, and I taught them everything I know, you'd think that person would know me better than almost anyone else. I'd get to tell them about my fears and what I love to do and what I hate to do, and I'd talk about just everything, and eventually they would know my favorite color, my favorite food, and how I like my coffee in the morning. And that's about where the disciples were with Jesus. They really knew who he was. But we run into a problem when we go into Mark chapter 8, verse 14. And so I'm gonna read this 14 through 21 is what we're gonna be reading through, and I might stop a little bit along the way. But so Mark 8:14. Now they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had only one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, "Watch out, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. Okay, so we'll stop there for a moment. What's going on is Jesus just fed 4,000 people, all right, with only a piece of bread and some fish. And that's all Jesus had at the time, but yet he filled every person up with food, and then he got several baskets left over, all right? And so now they're leaving, and the disciples are tired and all of that, and but if we look earlier, Jesus also fed 5,000 people with the same amount of food, and he gathered 12 baskets full after that. So the disciples, like I said, they got to watch all of Jesus' miracles. They got to see Jesus work in action every time. And first they see Jesus take a little bit of bread and a little bit of fish and feed 5,000 people. Now, most of you guys know that Kotzebue only has around 3,500 people in it, give or take. So imagine going to AC and grabbing a little bit of bread and catching a salmon. and trying to feed all of Kotzebue. It wouldn't happen because it's just not enough. But yet Jesus, he took that same amount and he fed more than Kotzebue, and he gathered 12 baskets full of food after that, so little Junior could go home to his village with Mom and give some food to him, you know. And the disciples were right there watching. They were the ones that were handing out food to the people. They were probably saying, like, I don't know how this is happening, but it's going on, you know. Like, they were the ones that were doing it, and they were the ones that gathered up the food afterwards. And then they were there with the 4,000 people, which is still more than all of Kotzebue. And they still gathered up several baskets full of leftover food after that, so other people could have them, you know. And so the disciples got to see this firsthand. They got to see the miracle, and they got to not only see a miracle, but they got to be a part of it. They're the ones that handed out the fish and the bread. They're the ones that gathered all the food back up. And so when we see it, you wouldn't think it would be much of a problem if they got on a boat and realized they only had one loaf of bread for 13 people, if you include Jesus. But the moment they got on, they realized that they didn't have enough bread. And Jesus cautioned them, saying, "Watch out, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod." And they began discussing with one another the fact that they had no bread. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, "Why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes do you not see, and having ears do you not hear? And do you not remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up?" They said to him, 12. "And the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up?" And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, "Do you not yet understand?" So what's Jesus really asking them here? He's asking, do you not understand? But do you not understand what? Like, what is it that they don't understand? Because by now, at this part of the book, they haven't spent all 3 years with Jesus yet, but they've spent a long time with him, and they've seen many, many miracles. They've seen God work through him unlike anything else that they've ever seen before, you know. And but yet and they don't have a hard time believing that God can heal the blind, and he can heal the deaf, and that he can make dead people walk again, and all that kind of stuff. But then the moment something goes wrong with them, they have a hard time believing that God's going to help them out. And, you know, if I spent 3 years with somebody and I saw them do all these crazy miracles, if I was running out of food at all, I'd just walk up to them and say, "Hey man, we're out of food. Can you like just poof some up or something?" You know, because that's pretty much what it seems like Jesus did. You know, of course he prayed about it and God like provided it, but shoot, man, like if he could just do that every time, that'd be great. You know, but so these guys just don't understand. But we don't understand what they don't understand. Like we don't know yet, and so I think God is saying here, do you not understand? And we're asking, do you not understand that, you know, do you think that he's saying, do you not understand that, you know, I'm Jesus, I can do it, you know? Yeah. Or do you understand that, like, you don't need food, we're just going across the river or the lake, we'll get to the other side soon and we'll have enough bread, like, you could just buy some there. He could be asking, do you understand that you're not going to die, you're going to be able to have food, you know, when we get to the other side. But if you look at the disciples' hearts here, they're worried about not having enough food. They've seen Jesus do so much for other people, but they haven't really realized what God did for them. You know, most of these disciples were fishermen. Some of them were tax dealers, and a lot of them just were never good people, or they were just like your average, everyday, uneducated person back then. And all it took for the disciples to follow Jesus was for him to come up and say, "Hey, come follow me." And they did, you know. And when Jesus said, "Let the dead bury their dead," they did. And when Jesus said, "Put down your nets and come follow me," they didn't even hesitate. They just went right ahead. But they lost sight of what Jesus did for them, because they kept seeing what Jesus was doing for everyone else. they didn't realize how lucky they were that they got to walk with Jesus every day and listen to God personally teach to them. They didn't understand that this was Jesus, you know. And they thought that Jesus would do these miracles for everyone else, but they probably forgot that Jesus did the biggest miracle for them, which was take them out of their old lives and bring them into a group of elite 12 people who would change the world. You know, Jesus just ascended into heaven and left pretty much Christianity with these 11 people, if you discount Judas. And these people are the ones that were the reason we know who Christ is today, because they wrote the letters and they created what we have as the Bible now, you know. And but these guys didn't understand that Jesus was enough. You know, they see Jesus working for everyone else, but they lost sight of what Jesus was doing in their own life. And I think a lot of the times we forget that Jesus is enough, and a lot of the times we don't. We see how God is working in everyone else's lives, but we don't see how he's working in our own life. You know, you can see that somebody else's life is being blessed to the max, and they're getting like brand new job, they get a new Snow-Go, a new four-wheeler, they get a new engine for their boat, they're catching tons of fish. And where it's easy to say, man, God is just like blessing them, but then in our own life, when our snow machines are breaking down or things are just going wrong with us, we assume God just forgot about us. But the thing is, God has done so much for us in the past. God, if he never did another thing for us right now, we would have enough to serve him eternally, to give him our life forever, if he never did another thing. Because we don't follow God for what he can do for us, we follow God for what he did for us. And that's what this is all about. But these guys are more concerned with the fact that they have no bread. They didn't even think about going up to Jesus and asking him if he could just poof some more up. It didn't even cross their mind. So did they actually know at this time who Jesus was? And I don't believe they did. They know what Jesus did and what Jesus could do, but if they really knew who Jesus was at this point in the book, they wouldn't have worried about the bread. They would have worried about trying to give that bread to everybody else and let themselves starve so they can go back and so they can serve each other, you know. And of course, when we go back through the rest of the Old Testament, we see that the disciples got it. Eventually they got it. They did understand, and they saw that Jesus was the Messiah. They saw that Jesus was the Son of God, and that through him there's life and life more abundantly, you know. And that's the truth. But at this time, even though they walked with God and they followed God, they didn't know God. They didn't know who Jesus was. And we have that problem a lot with us. And a lot of us, we claim to be a Christian. A lot of us read our Bibles, and a lot of us pray, and a lot of us talk about Jesus. But do you actually know who Jesus is? Do you actually have a hard day and you realize that it's okay because Jesus is enough? I don't have to have the money I need to get milk. I don't have to have my snow machine. I don't have to have a car or a plane ticket to Anchorage. I have enough right now where I am just because I'm with Jesus and just because Jesus is in me. And it's okay if you're not there, because even the disciples themselves weren't there, and they were walking with Jesus physically. And you know, we don't get that kind of luxury to walk hand in hand with Jesus, talking about how great the weather is, and you know, having him personally explain to us the depths and details of the Bible. But because these guys, we see that they didn't know who Jesus was, and then we see that eventually they did learn who Jesus was. If they could do it, we can do it, because we have the same Holy Spirit in us that the disciples 2,000 years ago had in them. And it wasn't easy for them. They went through a lot of hard times. They still had to walk with Jesus, and Jesus, he really scolded them sometimes. You read in the garden when the disciples were falling asleep while he was praying, Jesus comes back and says, "Could you not stay awake for 1 hour?" You know, Jesus, you know, he disciplined them, he scolded them sometimes, and he's going to do the same for us. But the disciples pushed through, and they let God speak to them the way that he was supposed to speak to them. And the disciples, they really tried their hardest. And God met them where he was at, and he never got angry with them, and he never got upset with them. And Jesus is never going to be angry and upset with you. And even if you don't understand now, even if you don't know him now, it's not too late, and it's never going to be too late. But so my question is for you: if you don't know who God is, then what's stopping you from trying to figure him out? What's stopping you from learning about who Jesus is? And for those of you who are saved and who really do follow God, then ask yourself this same question: Do you understand? And read this story in Mark 8 about the disciples in the boat and everything, and let God speak to you a little bit about your life and your perspective on Christ and how well do you really know him. And yeah, that's it. So thanks for listening and thanks for watching, and I hope that this message helps some of you guys.